You know, in the opening session, I gave a lot of gratitude, but there's always more to give, and I know there's a couple more folks that I want to thank. Because of where we are right now and what's been our home base, I really want to thank the Colonial Theater for hosting us. They always take really good care of us with a lean staff, and we're so, so appreciative. And also, in that package, we have AMT Productions, who's been doing a wonderful job with our AV and all of our tech needs. So thank you so much to the Colonial and to Alex and the AMT crew. Can we have a round of applause for them? And of course, we have track leaders, speakers, our pitchers, staff, the woman who did the yoga for us, our hula hooper. We have an intern that came to us this year and said, "Can I do some free video for you?" And we said, "Why, yes, you can." And so he was doing some interviews, and he's already produced a video for us. So we will send that to everyone after the summit. We also had a really great session last year where a song was written in real time, and they decided, Jess is cheering, and they decided to make it a Radically Rural theme song. And they have continued to meet and work on this song all year. And just late last night, I think it was, Daniel Roeder sent it out with a music video accompaniment to it. And so we're gonna send that out as well so that everyone can enjoy the Radically Rural theme song that was written last year. And then, yeah, there's so many more people to thank, all of our venues, all of our vendors, everyone works together for this big puzzle. And what an incredible 2 days that we have had. So I do want to make a note that travel to and from rural communities can be tricky. We know that. That's oftentimes why the closing session is not as well attended as the other sessions, because it takes time to get to the airports and all of that. But that's okay. We'll have more interaction from everyone. And I'm flipping, believe it or not, everyone sighs in relief. I'm flipping most of our announcements to the end because Tony has a flight, and so he needs to get out of here, you know, like he's gonna be running out like Cinderella with his coach waiting for him. So, so the things that we'll be announcing at the end, because I know some folks in the crowd are particularly interested in some of these announcements, the Solution Scavenger Hunt winner and our Pitchfork Prize winner, so there's $10,000 just waiting to be given out that we'll announce at the end. We'll also be recognizing and celebrating Terry Williams, who is one of the founders of Radically Rural, and who is still here with us right now in person. That made it sound like he was gone forever, but he's retiring at the end of this year. Oh, it's not quite time yet, Terry. I don't know if he's getting up. Okay. And yeah, so there'll be a couple announcements at the end, but we're gonna go ahead and just get right to it. And I'm gonna start with, we had a great meeting today, the four of us, and I'm gonna start with reading a quote that from Tony Pipa's interview leading up to Radically Rural. "We stand at an inflection point for rural, faced with a choice between two paths, one that leads to extraction and the other towards regeneration and resilient thriving. Our country's economy is shifting, and rural areas will play a pivotal role. The question is how we approach it." And that's what we've been doing over the last 2 days, right? We've been talking about the grassroots models we know and love from our keynotes and our sessions. We're distilling them into policy and strategy recommendations. Tony has led a focus group over the last 2 days to get pointed input from community members and leaders, which will be incorporated into the conversation. So we won't necessarily be directly asking all the same questions that he did with the focus group, but let me show you the questions that they've been talking about. Well, so one of them, what are the opportunities that you see for your rural community in the next 10 to 25 years? What are the barriers that you are experiencing or anticipate experiencing as you attempt to maximize those opportunities? And what do you suggest that policymakers must include in a national rural strategy? And not that yet. So now I'm going to pass it over. I'm going to come sit down and I'll pass it over to Marianne to give a little insight into how we're going to structure this time that we have together. We're just going to figure everything out right here and now. You will have all the answers by the time you leave. Just kidding.
Thank you, Juliana, and welcome everybody. And we really made this up at about noon today with whatever leftovers we could glean from whatever rooms were in Hannah Grimes. So a little bit of this and a little bit of that. You know, as I'm looking out at the audience, I am seeing one person that I'm pretty sure has been here all 6 years. Lisa Sieverts?
Yes,
Yeah. Terry and I have also been here all 6 years. Has anybody else been here all 6 years?
2.
Is that Roy?
Roy Wallen, yes, one of our coaches. Jess, yes. So that's pretty amazing. And then to the rest of you who've made it to the closing session, that's pretty amazing as well. So I think, why don't we all take a deep breath? It's been a busy 2 days and a busy 6 years. In 2017, in the fall of 2017, when Terry Williams and I sat down and started thinking about this idea for Radically Rural, we were feeling an amazing energy in our community. Rural was starting to feel different. It was starting to feel more optimistic, and we were really looking forward to, you know, maybe trying to pull people together that were our peeps, people that were doing amazing work in rural communities. And getting away from, I just know in the work that I do, there was a lot of hand-wringing, you know, for many years about things that weren't changing, things like broadband and healthcare and all those things that were challenging, but we were seeing amazing things that were working, just great ideas, and we wanted more exposure to those ideas. So our first Radically Rural Summit in 2018, we definitely struck a chord. The energy that came out of that summit has been felt ever since. And we've lived through pandemics and hybrid models and remote models, and we're really pleased to be back in just full in-person model again, because we really love that. We are recording a lot of the sessions for people who can't travel. They can benefit from the ideas, but it's really good to be back in person. We've also focused on really, you know, sharing and shaping ideas, and you know, that's focused a lot on doers, people like me. I love doing the work. It's nice being shoulder to shoulder in this room with people who do the work. But you know, it's also great to get models that are a little more strategic, that can help put form and increase impact of the work. And we're really pleased this year to add policy to that note. We can work until we are blue in the face, and if there are certain things in place, we may not be able to make too much of a change. And there are a lot of changes that just come at us. We have a pandemic, we can have recessions, but interestingly enough, some of the bigger forces in this world and some of the bigger forces that we're facing, we can change. And so having informed policy decisions and being part of that, I'm excited to be doing that. It's a foreign world to me, but learning more about it and knowing that we can make a change in something that just changes the environment of what we're doing. So that's been a sea change for this year, and what we're trying to do at this last session was pull together what we've been hearing from the last 2 days and having a kind of a final discussion that will send all of us out of here, hopefully with not only better ideas from the last couple of days, but some real forward steps in how to do that. So we are going to hear from you first, and Juliana will cover that section of it using the same format that we've used throughout the session. We are then going to go to Tony to just kind of get an overview of what policy is, because I think it's, if we're not living and breathing it, why it matters and what it is, I think would matter. Particularly what we've been hearing from you the last couple of days, Chris is going to talk about like where we're at right now, and then we will switch back to kind of some policy discussion about that gets really specific about a single policy that might illustrate what we're talking about. So that's the agenda, and I'll turn it over to Juliana. Thank you all for being here.
All right, so the energy this morning was really great during our solution slam, and so we're going to bring back a little bit of that energy, even though I know everyone's tired. And in all of the sessions over the last 2 days, we have been provided the opportunity to reimagine rural and then reflect on that. And the reflection question is, how did this session change your thinking or move you toward action? And so we'd like to just take some time right now, maybe 10 minutes or something like that, and just popcorn around the room. Please share something where a moment or an idea that has changed your thinking or moved you to action, and what is that action? So Julie is going to be our mic runner. So she is taller than the mic runner we had this morning, but I'm sure as effective. We'll
I'm not running.
And are you going to hold people accountable for time like Drew Kate did? Okay, so someone get us started.
Who's kicking us off?
Come on.
There we go, front row.
Front row.
This is my 3rd year getting to come, and every year I am reminded how important beauty and art is. I think right before I come, I kind of get into this space of like survival, like feeding myself, feeding my family, and sleeping and all the things that you have to do to stay alive. But when I come here, I'm really reminded that there are so many other things that are also just as important. And it's not just like feelings, it's scientific, and you can calculate it. So every time I leave, I'm like, yeah.
Thank you so much. I love that. Anyone else?
Who's next? Right.
As a young person who really wants to get into...
Why don't you give your name and where
Sorry.
you're from?
I'm Isaac. I'm from Montana.
Okay.
As a young person who really wants to get into agriculture but feels very negative, pessimistic about it because of just how costly land and other things are, it was great to be in some of the land and community sessions and hear about the things I preached to other people about, like going to the farmer's market and supporting local and those things, and how that's just as valid even if you can't be a farmer or rancher yourself. And then hear those things back at me was just really reassuring, and so that's something I'll take away and continue to be inspired about after the conference.
Great.
Thank you.
I'm Chris Campion. I'm Executive Director of the Wyndham Regional Commission across the river in southeast Vermont. We serve 27 towns. I needed this. I didn't know how much I needed it. I'm enmeshed all the time in land use policy and disaster recovery and mitigation, and working with towns and helping them in kind of their near glacial pace and decision making. And I don't know, when I first I came into planning from sustainable agriculture, and did that by way of reading Wendell Berry on Metro, going in and out of DC every day, and decided after I started reading that, I got to get the hell out of here. So I started working in sustainable ag, and that actually brought me into connecting agriculture with land use planning and community planning. And but just wanted to really appreciate the energy. It's great to connect with folk from Mississippi who were here, and folk from my former life working on sustainable ag policy like the NCAD ATRA folk, and really needed this. So just thanks for everybody for being here, and I look forward to future years.
Thank you.
Again, it doesn't have to be a long thing, just one thing you're going to take back to your work.
Hey, Leo York from Kentucky, Inventors Network, Kentucky. First of all, thanks so much for putting this event on. It's been incredible. The thing that I really took away, and I've always had the view that urban areas are the epicenters for change, and rural areas are more second fiddle, but this really showcases that that's not the case. Rural areas can absolutely be the epicenters for change. And thank you so much for showing me that.
Thank you. Did anyone's thinking get changed about something in addition to what he just said? Yeah. Is that Brett?
Yeah, I'm Brett from North Carolina, and the session about agrarianism really made me rethink how I think about my relationship to the land and how we all are connected, even if we're not farming every day. And yeah, it was just, like you said, really cool to be able to see other folks doing innovative things in places where people kind of toss aside that. So yeah, changing the narrative, very cool. Thank you.
Thank you, Brett.
Hey, I'm Megan Weiss. I'm from South Carolina Center for Rural and Primary Healthcare, and South Carolina's state motto is, "While I breathe, I hope." So that quote from the first session about how hope isn't a strategy, but without hope there is no strategy, has just really resonated with me in so many ways these past couple days.
Thank you so much. Yeah, go, Julie. Yeah.
All right. So specifically from Chris's presentation this morning, where he mentioned that the Aspen Institute doesn't have photos of barns. And I think that really ties to, the image of rural. We have to sort of supplement it with images of innovation and creativity and all the other things that we do in addition to being beautiful in the fall. So often is the promoted image of rural. So that's something I'm definitely taking away, invigorated with, to go back with. Because my job is to promote the Monadnock region, so.
Yeah, I'll say it's funny because on my Instagram, as soon as the end of September, I start getting all these posts from Vermont about leaves. And like whoever's doing that for Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine, they're beautiful shots, but it is literally the postcard dynamic. And so you start to think, well, that's all that's there. Mm-hmm. Instead of, it's great for visitation, but not so much about investment.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many pictures I have sent back to our comms team and say, this is not what's going on the cover of our report.
Yeah.
I am Jessica Wrightmore in Winchester, New Hampshire, the Winchester Economic Development Corporation. And one of the things that really impacted me was the tour at Tanglewood Estates. Obviously, workforce housing or housing seems to be a common problem across most rural places, but that tour and the heartfelt moments that Dan Hunt from Durango, Colorado, he moved the majority of people that were there to tears, talking about the impact that his community had, and definitely eye-opened a lot of people as well as myself with the impact that a resident-owned community could have with the rural impacts.
Yeah, if you didn't go to that, New Hampshire really has led the nation in the resident-owned community work on manufactured housing parks, and other states have been trying to learn from Rock USA, and that work was spreading. Got to work with them when I was in North Carolina, and it is difficult work because the people who own those parks do not want to sell to residents. And so it's not a simple process, but it is a really powerful one. Thanks for bringing that.
And thank you for sharing that. And thank you to Todd for putting that session together. He went above and beyond to apply for a mini grant to help cover the cost of getting people there on the bus from New Hampshire Housing Council or Alliance? New Hampshire Housing. I was going overboard there with another word. But thank you so much for putting that together.
Hi, I'm Jess Gelter. I live in Brattleboro and work in Keene. And I think the two things that I'm coming away from this with, one is the importance of opportunities for peer exchange. Obviously, Radically Rural is that, but in one of our sessions, we talked a lot about how creating a cohort that works together over the course of a couple of years is such a valuable learning experience and solidarity experience for folks doing the hard work in rural communities. And the other thing was about power dynamics, and we're sort of exploring what the identity of the people we serve is. Recently, we did a mini grant program where about 70% of folks were at or near the poverty line that were applying. And so really looking at and acknowledging the power dynamics that exist within our organization and within the arts community. And there was a great opportunity to sort of start to talk about that in the second session, which is really cool.
Thank you so much, Jess. That's great. And the power dynamic conversation was done in a pretty fun exercise on our feet, which was really cool, kind of through theater. So thank you for planning that session, Jess.
Todd Horner. I'm based here in Keene. I organized the Main Street track, and organizing, sessions for a track, I, get tunnel vision on, my responsibilities, but this year I was able to attend some of the other sessions, and I had the opportunity to attend the Agrarian Collective session, and I was just struck coming from the session that Jessica mentioned on resident-owned communities. There was a clear through line where there was a slide that had the principles of collaboration or collectivism, and one of the session speakers at the session on resident-owned communities said, we use those very same principles when we are helping communities move to a cooperative model, and just kind of was a clear example of how the different tracks are covering different topic areas, but there are a lot of similar principles that run through them and lessons that can be shared. So that was kind of cool to see that organically spring out of the programming.
Very cool. Thank you, Todd. All right. Is that our natural transition point? I should also say that we did invite Gloria and Lakota to be with us, and Alex to be with us on the stage as well, and they weren't able to, understandably, for travel, and then for Lakota's reason as well. So I did want to mention that too, that they were invited to be a part of this conversation. And did I see another hand? Yeah, go for it. Jeff, right? Yes.
Yes, Jeff from Virginia. Wow, that was odd. So I wanted to share this because I just had this experience, and the after party tonight is at Nova Arts. And I got to go into that space today and experience it during the daytime. And I just wanted to share with everybody the experience during the daytime because it's set up as a coffee shop. It's a coffee shop during the day. They have a coffee roasters there. There's a vinyl shop. I think there's some other retail there too. And then tonight it'll be set up as a concert venue. And it is a real innovative, fantastic use of a space. And again, a collaborative, people coming together to share space and I'm sure share costs. And I was really inspired by that, particularly in a smaller community, what that provides. So I just want to provide that context because if anybody goes tonight, you'll see it set up as a concert venue, and you may not have the context of it during the daytime. So,
Thank you. I've often been impressed with their diversification too of their business, and I feel like they do a really good job of combining like almost all of the tracks, in what they do, and it is often a landing place for folks. So thank you for sharing that. Yes.
I think something that's very representative of this part of the world, like this little space in New Hampshire, is that of course we have a whole bunch of Dunkin' Donuts, we have a Starbucks, we have a Roma Joe's, but then we have 2 locally owned coffee shops that have been here for, one of them over 20 years, and then the other one at least a decade. And so, it shows that we kind of really support that local. And of course, there's, you know, bigger things that come in, but the others can stay alive.
Definitely. All right, and one more. Oh, Jackie, yes. In the back, or middle right, yeah. And this will be our last one.
So last week I was this close to calling the hotel and canceling my reservation because we have a huge art festival that we've done for 46 years happening next weekend. And I just didn't think I could pull off coming to this. And then I looked at the tracks again. I said, oh, there's not really that much art stuff. And I am so glad I did not cancel my reservation. First, I just want to general comment on the beautiful city this is and the intentionality that all the businesses have placed into the flora and just the beauty of the outside of their space. Of course, as an artist, I'm going to notice that. So thank you so much. I also was encouraged that all of the collaboration that we do as an arts organization in Wyoming County, upstate New York, it is definitely valuable by attending this conference that was validated. But I just want to mention two quotes that really spoke deeply to me. One was, rural is a place of opportunities, and when you have the look of poverty, people think that is the norm.
Thank you so much, Jackie. And Jackie was our host when we went to Perry, New York, and that's one of the reasons that we changed it, the model, to having folks voluntarily submit, because I realized during these trips, it's a lot of work to host us. Did we ask these people if they wanted to do this work? But she completely embraced it and did an amazing job. What she did is she took us to places until she didn't take us to her own organization until the very end. She first took us to places that were involved in the arts but weren't arts directly related. And so we got to see this thread and the partnerships in the community weaved throughout, and it was really, really beautiful. And she hosted us for this amazing catered lunch, and just thank you so much, Jackie, for everything you did when we were there. All right, it's time. So, who is next?
So I'm jumping in here. So first off, I just want to say thank you to the organizers. Thank you to Juliana and to Marianne for the invitation. But I also just think thanks to the entire Radically Rural team for what they've been able to do and create the community over the last couple of days. I think they really deserve a big round of applause. Thank you. It's really been wonderful. It's been wonderful to be here. So, as Marianne said, I think what we wanted to do was launch up into a conversation about policy and what is policy. To her point, you know, policy in some respects is setting the environment in which towns and communities and rural places are seeking to thrive and seeking to be resilient to any changes that they're encountering. But really, what is policy? And policy is set at the state level. Policy is also set at the federal level. I have much more expertise at the federal level, but I also, there also is an intersection between federal and state often. The way I think about policy and explain policy is it's set through legislation often. It sets either resources or incentives, and in some respect is like the public version of strategy. Beneath it, it has a set of values and a set of objectives that really are strategic. And policy is not always just legislation. So legislation can get passed and set aside resources, for example. But then those resources need to be implemented. And there are an enormous amount of decisions that then get made on how to develop a program and how to design and how to choose who's going to get those resources and how those resources get allocated and deployed and decided. And that's what happens in the executive branch or through agencies that the executive branch works with. So when we think about federal policy and federal rural policy, what do we mean by federal rural policy? And the one thing that I think is really important, even to think historically, is how important the federal government and public resources and public strategy has been to enable rural communities to thrive over the last couple hundred years. And even just thinking back 100 years ago, you have things like the original impetus for antitrust legislation was really to ensure that there was level decision-making between centers of finance and decision-making and other places in the country. It was really to protect actually the economic decisions and enable them to be made more locally in some respects. That was if you read actually some of the speeches that congressional members made during some of the key pieces of antitrust legislation, what they're doing is to say, look, we want to protect the ability to make our own economic decisions rather than have those economic decisions get made elsewhere, whether it be New York City, Washington, D.C., San Francisco, where else. And when you think about things like the Rural Electrification Act, the Rural Housing Act, the land-grant universities, and the extension services that came from the land-grant universities, transportation policy, even the highway system, all of those were intentionally done to ensure that rural was given a fighting chance to be connected to the modern economy and sort of the social life of the United States. Now, it also benefited greatly the overall economy. I mean, rural is really the center of our food, our energy, our fiber, even places where people enjoy themselves, come to Keene and have a great time. But there was real intentionality in passing policy that was focused specifically on rural, taking into account how to connect rural to the rest of the country as we were going through changes economically, especially after World War II and the Great Depression. And I feel like the chart that I showed, which obviously has a lot of decisions behind it, has a lot of resources behind it, shows the federal government wanting to be responsive. Those programs were created because of an expressed need by some constituents that then a congressional delegation or even maybe many people in different congressional delegations got together and got behind. But I think where we're at as a country right now is we've kind of lost the thread on being specific to rural places and what they might need in the modern time, in kind of the modern economy that we have, what's now become a global economy, which now has a lot of, a good portion of it driven by a knowledge economy. And where does rural sit in all of that? And how can we take advantage of the human capital and the assets, the natural assets that rural has? And how do we do it in a way that we've learned from the past that's not extractive, that's actually regenerative, where the value remains here so that towns, communities, and people can sustain themselves and be resilient over time in the face of future changes, because things continue to change and change rapidly. I sit in a place where at Brookings, we've got a lot of economists, and I will have economist friends even say, well, what really is, what really is the rural in say a knowledge economy or an information economy. And it gives this sense that, hey, maybe rural is obsolete or it's going to be a tough road to hoe for rural. But I would actually suggest that a lot of the headwinds that many rural places have faced over the last couple of decades has not been because of some natural evolution of the economy, but because of policy decisions as well. Antitrust enforcement actually has changed significantly in the way in which we even think about it. It went to be focused on making sure it was the lowest price for the end consumer rather than actually protecting that economic decision making that I was talking about at the community level. Transportation policy related to airports has changed. And so we no longer subsidize or ensure that airlines are particularly servicing regional airports all the way across the country. And that has had real economic impacts for some communities. Trade policy, the distributional effects of trade policy have been uneven. And I think we saw changes coming when we created certain trade policy, but I don't think the policy response was equal to the changes that communities felt. So all of these things are policy decisions, and they create the environment in which communities and organizations are working to ensure that their community stays healthy. And so when I talk about federal rural policy, that's kind of what's in the back of my mind. But it also does come down to those resources that are in the chart. And how well are those resources actually getting to the communities that need it most or could use it most? How do we maximize the public benefit of those particular resources? Rural is a place where public resources have often been first movers rather than complements to, say, private investment. It's the public investment that's actually brought the private investment along many times. And so how do we make sure we're getting that right in this day and age? Some of that's going to be around implementation. How do we make sure the programs are set up in a way that's easy to access, that the access is getting to the communities who could use it most? How do we make sure it's consistent? How do we make sure the resources are flexible, are going to things that are actually matching the opportunities that communities have? But some of that's also strategic. And just, I really do think that there is not necessarily, at this point, a coherent vision for how our policymakers think about rural areas and the value that they provide to the United States at this point in time, and then how our policy can best support that. But I think we are at a moment where there's growing awareness that rural communities have unique characteristics. They're not just a mini version of urban communities. Governance works different. The way communities come together and collaborate and work together within their communities and community to community is different. The ecosystem of organizations in particular communities are different. They're not just a mini version of urban or suburban, and that makes us have to think differently about how we make sure that the resources and decisions we're making on strategy meet those particular needs, and we maximize what rural can really bring, both to themselves and their communities, but also to their state and to the country writ large. So I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to turn it over to Chris. I mean, one of the things that I guess I would say as I hand off to him is, Mary Ann talked about some of the conversations we've been having about policy, and some of the key themes that I think really cut across both those conversations and then other things that I've heard just in conversations I've been having bilaterally and one-on-one with people is a lot of opportunity exists right now. We've had major pieces of legislation passed, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, the Inflation Reduction Act, even the CHIPS and Science Act, which has certain things that are rural specific. So there's a lot of resources available, but accessing those resources needs to be really important, and sometimes rural communities aren't well positioned to do that because of the barriers to those resources. But there's also a growing awareness in Washington, D.C., both in the executive branch agencies and in Congress, about the need to invest in capacity at the local level to be able to facilitate better access to those resources. And that's where I'll leave it for Chris.
All right, so the second half of the lecture is going to include the Teapot Dome scandal and the Taft-Hartley Act. And there will be a quiz before you leave. No, I really appreciate Tony laying that out, because it is really important. We didn't just get here by accident. And there's a great piece of research sort of out there and being done about really understanding the decisions that were made 30 years ago about allowing us to move away from an antitrust frame of mind towards a concentration of capital that led to all those pieces that Tony talked about, and sort of not that it was anti-rural, but when you've developed an economic philosophy that the concentration of capital and the growth of companies in monopoly situations is a stronger path for your country to take, there are consequences for rural places. And that's the place we find ourselves in. And as I talked about today, there's a couple of things to think about in that. One is, what's the narrative around rural and how do we change that? And we all have a role in that. And we are working on a project to really try to roll out some resources next year to help everybody working in rural places to think about how do we incorporate and message the right way as we shape this thing. And again, I want to be certain that while we make sure we have that rule about barns, because we know the farming piece is out there, but we feel like that has allowed the nation to misconstrue that farming, small farmers are the dominant framework for agriculture, and that's not the case. We want to push back on the factory farm construct. In New England, because of its terrain, is one of the last places that factory farming hasn't taken over at the scale it has in other places. And that's a really important thing to understand. What's different about supporting small farmers, food systems, food co-ops, farm-to-table efforts, all of that stuff is sort of glazed over, and the Farm Bill, which should be about farms, is not about that kind of work. It's in how do we support and subsidize the large corporate dynamics. The thing that I wanted to hone in on, though, is where Tony left, which is going back to what I talked about this morning, is sort of understanding whenever you do deep research or analysis about the challenges in rural, people are often still stumped by, well, what's the distribution strategy to try to change this? And that's really where the Rural Development Hub model becomes really important, and we think Thrive Rural Framework can really be a theory of change tool for people to think about this work in a much more holistic way. And so there are some tools and research and strategies and frameworks to that we could all be connecting to in a way that we haven't really done before. But most importantly, we have this moment that Tony talked about that really brought us together to doing this Reimagining Rural Assistance Network, was recognizing when the Biden administration said, we're going to try to roll out a lot of investments, obviously infrastructure, but they had brought a bunch of great rural folks into the administration and to agencies, and they wanted, first time, I think, in all of our kind of professional lifetimes, that we felt like rural was on the map, and we all said, this is our great society moment. And what are we going to do to get this money to the places that need it most that won't be able to do it? And so what we found was that even though the will was there, the practical application of what it's like to design programs, pass legislation, get money out the door, and hold it accountable so that you can report back before the next election almost naturally precluded us solving a lot of that problem. So folks all over the country have sort of experienced this frustration of these really weren't designed for communities of our size. And as I said earlier, that the benefit of that, the counter benefit of that, is that folks have recognized that. And this notion of, oh, we have to do more to build and support capacity efforts. And I think the Hubs network, and if you know, for those of you local, thinking about Hannah Grimes as a hub entity, their ability to do all of the non-transactional work of bringing folks together, building trust, you know, facilitating a grant being written as a collaborative, connecting across a region and not just in Keene itself, but bringing in non-traditional partners. Having that flexible community capacity building resources changes the game in terms of this region's ability to then respond to funding opportunities, do the right kind of planning, you know, be able to prepare and have the right kind of resources so that funding hopefully will be available. And so I think that's our opportunity for all of rural going forward, is to understand what we actually have a framework for what scalability looks like. The challenge is that the words capacity building can have a very pejorative connotation. It sort of says, well, you don't have any capacity building now, or you don't have enough, which is I think, and the words themselves to politicians don't really mean much. What we heard a lot as we've been working on this effort in the, to get capacity funding in the Farm Bill is politicians and staffers' eyes glaze over. Like, that sounds good, but what is that? So what we're really trying to do is collect stories of what is it like to do this work in your community, in your region? What did you do, and what was that flexible thing that you had or were allowed you to do that? Or what couldn't you do because you didn't have that funding that prevented this work from happening, and there's a cost to that. And trying to sort of, and I think this is going to be an ongoing discussion. It needs to be happening with philanthropy at the community, regional, and national foundation level. Certainly needs to be happening with state agencies and federal agencies. But it also involves us, and we were talking about this in the opening conversation with, around philanthropy, a conversation with nonprofits of like, if we want increased flexibility and we want the ability to do this sort of I'll just say non-quantitative work, this qualitative capacity building, we've got to come up with a sense of how we can be held accountable. Because as soon as there's a long history of as soon as you create this sort of really flexible funding sources, there's lots of examples of waste, fraud, and abuse show up, and then suddenly that's the excuse to cut funding. And I'm not trying to throw anybody under the bus, but that's part of that challenge, is flexibility without some accountability, isn't a good track record for getting money out the door. And obviously we don't want to get it to places that can't handle it at that moment. And there's a lot of that pressure of like, well, it's got to go to so-and-so's district, or it's got to, if these folks get it, then those folks get it. And those are hard conversations. And that's where regionalism really becomes a really important but also difficult thing. The notion of, where there's capacity in a region is really the place to build on and kind of continue that momentum. But that should, if done right, has benefits for everybody in that region. So there is this moment, I think, where we're trying to communicate to all folks in rural that thinking about your story of what it means to have flexible or capacity building, the opportunity to do that work, how would you tell that almost in an elevator pitch? Not quite the 60-second slam, but certainly not paragraphs of details. Policymakers don't have long attention spans, and we need the ability to communicate these in very tangible ways. And then there will be opportunities to hopefully influence staffers and policymakers when the Farm Bill is moving through this process, and hopefully will contain this opportunity to create a pilot for capacity building. Even in the best case scenario, that doesn't mean that money's going to get everywhere. It won't be enough, but it will certainly set the precedent of, oh, people are doing this work, they've gotten this funding, this is what it looks like on the ground, we can quantify benefits, we can see the impact, this is why we need to keep scaling it. We can have conversations with funders about, outside of government, about why they should be adding to this. So it really is an opportunity to change the game in rural in a way that we have not had in our professional lifetimes.
Can I just add something that? So, just taking it down to the operational level. So I think what we were hearing, and I certainly know my experience, is there has been money coming out. This is this moment in time. I think that's what we're talking about, this opportunity. It has come out. It's had challenges. So I think for other organizations that have been getting funding, they've come out fast. They're building the airplane as they're flying it. It's been kind of harried and hectic, but there is a moment, I think is what we're getting at here, where they get that, they know that, there's still money to come. There's an opportunity in the Farm Bill to get this capacity money, and that if we have our stories down, that we can probably influence this going forward. The difference for us is we could get money to fund our incubator program, but can we get money to work with partners in the community to influence something that has a lot more higher level impact? And that's been the not flexible money to get, because program income funds Hannah Grimes programs, doesn't fund us working with the Chamber and Southwest Regional Planning to work on housing together, us from an entrepreneurial point of view, somebody else from another point of view. So I think that is where we're at.
Yeah, just to put a fine point on it. So the Farm Bill is a massive piece of legislation. Happens once every 5 years. It sets corporate subsidies for and supports for commodities, crop insurance, SNAP, which is the food stamp program. All of that is under the aegis of the Farm Bill. But there is also a portion of the Farm Bill that's focused on rural development. And there's been conversation this year to take a proposal that was part of the original Build Back Better Act. Remember that a couple of years ago? That got to a particular point, the Build Back Better Act, and then fell apart. And then a portion of it was revived and passed as the Inflation Reduction Act. Well, there was a proposal in that called the Rural Partnership Program. And it was meant to be flexible money that goes directly to local communities, partnerships at the local level, and that flexible money could be used for staff, could be used for coordination, could be used for planning, it could be used for whatever it is that that local community or that local set of partners felt like they needed. And so it's kind of the software that you might need for all of that funding that's out there that's really hardware funding, actually. That's the way the federal government is set up. And there's hope and conversation that that particular proposal would become part of the Farm Bill when the draft legislation is proposed. My sense is that if it were to come, it would not necessarily be appropriated money, which means it would be authorized. They would create a new program and then might need to have money put against it at some point in the future. But it gives an opportunity for people to be able to tell the story of why this money would be important. And I think that we can't have enough stories about that. And we can't have enough engagement with policymakers at all levels of why that's important. And so I think it's an opportunity just to start to follow potentially the process of this being proposed and happening, and having your voices to be a part of making sure that it continues to be part of the process moving forward and goes forward and maybe becomes a reality.
And I think what I told them earlier today at lunch is I said, I will be the designated unashamed question asker, because there's lots of us in here who don't live and breathe policy, and so it might be a bit foreign. So I think this is a great specific piece of legislation for us to keep our eye on. And let's talk about what that might actually do in our work. So I'm looking at Barb in the audience. I ran into her in the downtown today and invited her to join us. She's retired as our town clerk, and she knows how hard it can be to get things done when you're a part of a town where maybe you only work part-time. You don't even have full-time hours to get things done, and maybe there's only a couple part-time people that work in the town, and the select board members are volunteer, and everyone is volunteer basically, and so it can be really, really hard to get things done. And you know, Jackie just mentioned, how can I possibly take this time to get away? We're just constantly saturated with how is this possible? How many times have you been in a group of folks and you have this idea and you're like, yes, yes, let's do it. And then you look at each other and you're like, who's gonna do it? Who can actually do this work? And it's really hard to, when you have the ideas, you know what you think needs to be done. And rural communities generally know what they need. And so funding like this, that's flexible, it's direct, it's not someone coming in to save us, it's funding the people who know what need to be done and can get the work done. I want to follow this policy and see where it goes. And in the focus group, with the questions that they went over, we will send to everyone, when the white paper is completed, we're gonna send that to everyone. And if you have thoughts or ideas in response to those 3 questions, send them to us as well to be included. But I think that when we're talking about how we can bridge all the grassroots work that we do with policy, this is just a great example because it's practical, because all of us have felt that, what it's like not to have enough time, not to have enough money, or both all at the same time.
I just want to connect the dots here just to make sure, because what I think is unique about this moment is that this opportunity connects all the stuff we've been talking about. It's sort of, we're not getting into like, you know, there are all that chart that Tony has of all those programs. There's obviously fights about funding for all sorts of rural programs, but this is kind of that missing secret sauce that allows communities to think holistically about what they want to do, what's missing, and how they strengthen their sense of, as a region, their ability to like execute on their goals and dreams. And so the idea of placemaking through arts and entrepreneurship and conservation and small business development, all of that work takes greater capacity to do in coordination and get out of those silos that we talked about and thinking about how we're like it had the ability to sort of change this, to me, as a tipping point where we start to have different conversations with foundations, and we start to have different conversations with federal agencies, and we have different conversations at the state level about, oh, we need to stop looking at rural as this sort of almost frozen in time region that people go when they don't want anything to change, or isn't a place to invest, or isn't the place where innovation happens, and start thinking about it as a different and unique but huge set of assets and opportunities that we should be investing in, but we need to invest differently than we do in our major cities. So I think it is really different. You know, we don't usually want to get in the weeds on policy. It gets really tiresome, but I think if everyone can see it in the context of everything we talked about, hopefully it starts to have a sense of gravitational pull that, and it isn't just about the Farm Bill. I think we will keep talking about this and trying to push it forward again in all these other arenas, regardless of what happens in this one moment. I do feel like we should have sung the I'm Just a Bill song, though.
Yeah. So
You didn't watch Schoolhouse
we
Rock?
would like to open up to the audience if there's, comments, ideas, questions. We're not averse to ending a little bit early on the, whatever. So, but we would like to invite some conversation about this. And we will, through Radically Rural, and I think all of you, because you're here, will get that. We'll be keeping you updated. We'll keep you linked to activities in both, give you real practical things that you can do.
Me again. So in my spiel, I talked about how I left DC after reading Wendell Berry. So then I went and worked locally on sustainable ag, and I kept running against these policy issues. So then I became the federal policy coordinator for the National Campaign for Sustainable Agriculture on the 2002 Farm Bill. And what they're saying is absolutely correct. And these policy issues, it's critical to engage. I mean, I organize with groups like National Family Farm Coalition and Rural Coalition and Federation of Southern Cooperatives and those kinds of groups. But it's absolutely critical that we get as organized with the rural development side of things. And this is kind of a, I would argue, we're kind of at it's even a more critical point, kind of a fight for the soul of rural policy. Because right now there's a lot of darkness out there with a lot of blame about, it's almost like we were talking earlier, right, about competition versus cooperation. And it's like, it's kind of the dark side of competition, and somebody to blame for what's going on. Whereas what this whole conversation about here today and yesterday has been about the light out there and about the good things that are happening and how working cooperatively, you know, rising above and seeing real solutions come out of the rural communities. And that's a story that's not told enough, because what happens in media is all the dark stuff. And so it's really critical. It still makes a difference if everybody in this room actually communicates with their legislators about the needs for this stuff. That has not changed. If they start seeing these blips on their radar, people talking about something as obscure as this rural capacity or rural partnership bill that you're talking about, it can make a real difference. So I'm happy to give some time to this, go back to put on my old hats, but really it's critical, I think, to have conversations in your communities about the Farm Bill beyond the farm stuff, beyond the Farm Bureau versus, the price supports versus, and big ag versus small, but get into this rural development piece about how these policy issues ultimately relate to the survivability and sustainability of your communities. It may not sound like much, but it can have a huge change if you can go back to all of your communities. And so thank you for bringing this up.
I think what I took away from that is you said something about giving us time on this, right? No, just kidding. You said you'll write the white paper, right? No.
Jalen, ears are well honed. One thing I would say to your point, and you just take the Farm Bill itself as an example. There are a lot of stakeholder groups with a lot of power, frankly, on those other pieces of the Farm Bill, on the crop insurance, on the commodities, even on SNAP. And we don't have that kind of infrastructure, frankly, for people like you who are working in your communities to have your voices collectively heard on issues just of development, of rural development, of the kind of community and economic development that you're underway on. And that is something that is incumbent upon Chris and I and colleagues that we have in DC. He mentioned the Reimagining Rural Assistance Network, which we're both a part of and helped create. We have to build that infrastructure. I mean, I think there is a voice waiting to be heard. And if we can provide you with an easy platform for those voices to be heard, I think we just need to get, and it's extremely important for you to be talking to your congressional delegation and your legislators. But as we've been talking about here throughout 2 days, rural is extremely diverse across the country. So we need to get your legislators, not just to their districts and their states, but we need to get them to the other side of the country to see rural there. And we need to be thinking about rural kind of overall and kind of build the infrastructure for all those voices to be sharing that and to be working together on that, I think. And that's incumbent upon us, and we're definitely going to take that away from our time with you today.
So any other comments, questions, or even what I'd like to know is even policy ideas. I'm just curious, like we're talking about one specific piece of legislation that we're interested in following because of the need that we see and the themes that came out of the focus groups and the philanthropy event and all the things that we've done, capacity, needing space. So But are there other policies you guys would recommend? And I can follow up with you too as I develop the white paper. Todd. I said that so authoritatively. Whew.
Yeah, so one idea about capacity building policy is, it needs to be flexible, but I think in addition it needs to be patient, right? Building capacity takes time, and I think that's been one of the biggest challenges of all this funding that's become available coming out of the pandemic. The fire hose has been turned on, and you see a funding announcement and you got to get your application in 3 weeks later. And that just doesn't work for rural communities that need to enlist a volunteer to put together that application. So I think flexibility plus patience, giving communities time to build those skills will be really important. Yeah.
Yes. And would you imagine that as something just to make a plug in what we're already talking about, or something different? Like that specific legislation? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, it's one of the key tenets we've talked about is ongoing support. And one of the things that Tony brings from his previous work at USAID is the recognition that internationally we've done a better job of investing in rural places than we do in the US. Like the time frames for international development are more like 5 to 7 years in places, whereas we're thinking of everything in 1 and 2 year increments, which is really because those are election cycles and people want to report, and even local and state elections are in those cycles. So it is, we do ourselves no favor with those timelines, and that is definitely something we've built in. And I think, again, to politicians' credit, one that's been bipartisan and people recognize it isn't just a, parachute someone in to write a grant and then you're good kind of thing.
Actually. Oh, sorry.
No, Julie, it's okay.
Hi, I'm Dan Eaton. I'm a state legislator, have been for about 40 years, and I'm chair of the county delegation. And when you're talking about the funding, one of the problems we have in rural is silos. The towns don't know how to cooperate together. The governments don't know how to cooperate together. One of the things I've worked on for the last 10 years was hiring a grants manager for the county. And we now have 2 heading towards 3. And it's generated over the last half dozen years tens of millions. But we've built relationships both in the state level and federal level. And we are taking our grants managers and having them run classes for local government. And part of the class is, by the end of class, you should be writing a grant at the end of the class. And can you collaborate that grant with the community next to you, or 3 communities, to maximize the impact? And we're having great success. And as long as individuals, towns, communities continue to think in silos and only doing their own thing, you're not going to have a success, and you're not going to have the longevity where we're getting grants now that are going year after year after year and are able to spread that out. And in fact, part of our grants help to fund you.
Amen.
Definitely. Julie, did you have
I think it's a really important point, and it comes back also to patience, because actually doing that well requires a lot of trust building and a lot of time, and that requires resources. Like, we don't think about resources in that. We kind of assume people will do that on their volunteer time or on their off time, kind of put the time into building that relationship and then figuring out that coordination and that partnership. And I don't know about you, but I grew up in north central Pennsylvania, and man, to get the place where I grew up, coordinating with the place where I went to elementary school, it's 2 different high schools, and they are going at it on a Friday night. And, there's kind of inbred competition almost in some respects. And so switching that around to cooperation takes time, takes trust, takes leadership being willing, it takes incentives from the policy side, but it takes patience. And that's hopefully part of what we're trying to build into. When we say capacity building, we mean capacity building also for that kind of collaboration and coordination. and to be able to fund the go-between who can make sure that those parties are coming together, and then it's not just one meeting, but it's 100 meetings that it's going to take for that to actually occur.
Definitely. And one thing that we talked about at lunch as well is sometimes it can be hard to connect. Like as we're, let me start over. My brain's popcorning. When we talked about this closing session, we said we're going to be, developing policy together in real time, right? Only so much can be done in the amount of time we have. We will continue to work on this white paper, send correspondence out to everyone who's been a part of this. You can give feedback, write back, be a part of drafting this. One thing that I like to do to kind of anchor it is you might not know how some of these like big federal policies are directly impacting you personally. Another way to localize it is think about some like zoning regulations that kind of impact you. So we have a lot of signage conversations. Barb is smiling about how businesses can get the signage that they need to promote their businesses and things like that. And so be thinking, and if they're not allowed to, how can they get the business that they need? So be thinking over the next couple months as we develop this about maybe some of the policies that you didn't originally think about, but maybe impacting what you're doing and how we could change those things. So we're gonna take one more question, comment, feedback, and then we will let Tony exit to his chariot, and then we will and then we will have our winners announced and wrap up. So, one more question, comment. Yes, Jess.
Thanks. One of the interesting sort of things that comes up for me is looking at the system of resources coming to rural communities, and there's the support and the grant applications, and there's some technical assistance, but to me the piece around accountability is having individuals or leaders or organizations that are under-resourced fulfilling that accountability need. I wonder what that could look like if it were different or if it were differently supported. And to me, that's like one piece of the system that would be really exciting to see some policy change around, or even a regional network developed around support systems where there were centralized technical assistance programs for that accountability piece. Just for an example, I have a USDA subsidized home loan, and it's amazing. All I had to do was have a need. Somebody saw me, and they said, "You need this, apply for it." "Oh wait, I'll do that for you." All I have to do now is send a check in once a month, and they take care of everything from my taxes to my home insurance, and it's an incredible system of support that allows me to access that resource. And it just covers the whole system, and it's amazing.
I love that. Recently, when my committee was working on our brownfields project and structural assessment of a building, I told this story at the philanthropy event, I think, but structural assessment of the building was the first step. Can we actually keep the building once this is cleaned up? And so we were talking about CDBG block grants and the application process and how long this would be. And I originally had mapped out like a 10-year timeline, to work on this thing. And then through the help of, is JB in the room? Someone that works with Todd, Southwest Region Planning Commission, he got us in touch with New Hampshire DES, and they said, "We just got a new contract with our structural engineers. We have the funding. All you have to do is just send us a letter and you can use our structural engineers." And that just was like, how can it possibly be that easy? But that's how easy it needs to be, because every single person on that committee is a volunteer. We all have small children. We all have jobs or multiple jobs. And so it is allowing us to move forward in a really flexible way that most work like that needs to be done, it's good to get this work done, should be that easy to some extent. We should be paving the way for volunteers to be doing this sort of work. All right, I want to thank Tony, Chris, everyone in this room. Giving 2 days of time is a huge ask, and I love that Jackie mentioned how glad she was, because that's what we like to say, is that we're trying to fill your tank. You know, we're not trying to take more. We're trying to be that gust of wind in your sails that pushes you forward. We're only one piece of the puzzle, and all of you in this room are other pieces of the puzzle. And so let's keep working together. We oftentimes talk about impact at Radically Rural. We're not, you know, we're just like you in a room full of organizers, you know, like, how do we keep this energy going year round? How do we keep this work going year round? And it's hard to figure out how to do. The white paper is one of the things we're gonna do to summarize these concepts and make recommendations. But then we also settled on, how about a Facebook group? That's pretty accessible. So if you search on Facebook for Radically Rural Network, that is a network, a Facebook group that you can join, and we can keep conversations going year round. The app will also stay available, but for most folks, Facebook is something that's much more easily accessible and a part of most folks' normal day. Not you, but other people. And not Terry either. When we had this conversation in the planning team, I was like, well, okay. So that is it for this part of the session. Thank you so much for being here.
We'll see you at the party.
Thank you.
Our extraordinary volunteer, Eileen, that I mentioned in the opening, is taking Tony. She literally this morning gave me the shirt off her back because I forgot to switch my laundry this morning. And I said, I cannot wear this shirt one more day without washing it. She said, you can have mine. I was like, that is something. So now let's see where we are. Okay, the good news. Solutions scavenger hunt. I'm gonna grab, or Allison, are you able to grab that basket that's right on the side? The Solutions Scavenger Hunt winner is Maddie Layton. Come on up. Maddie, while she's making her way up here, loves Doc Martens. You should ask her about her collection of Doc Martens. They have their own Instagram. Thank you. Congratulations. Thank you so much. Maddie loves games, and she's very good at them. All right, now I will recognize Allison Chisholm, who does so much work with Hannah Grimes. We're very grateful for her. I'm going to let her announce our Pitchfork Prize winner, which is $10,000.
This is the best job in the world because I got the privilege of working with 9 local businesses who started the Pitchfork Challenge process. If you were at our final event earlier this afternoon, you saw 4 of those. I want to tell them and you that the judging was so close. In fact, there were only 3 points that separated the whole lot. So it was a long conversation in a small dressing room that finally made the decision. And so if the Pitchfork Challenge businesses finalists would stand up, I'd really like to recognize all of you. Thank you so much for your participation. For those of you that missed it, we had software as a service, a herbal wellness brand for women, a livestock landscaping business, and a custom landscape and garden design business. So a wide range, all of them coming right here from local New Hampshire. So we are super excited about that. Without further ado, the winner of the Pitchfork 2023 competition is Kelly McCutcheon from Broken Boat Farm. I also want to honor the Keene High School, who has been an integral part of all of Radically Rural. This is their wooden check, but there is a real check to be given to the winner later today.
Vincent Van Goat, Mama Necknuts, Michelangelo Goat, Wayne Goatsky, Carl Weather, Goat Simmons, Tiny Elvis, and Abigail Adams are going to be so proud. We don't have time to name all 32 sheep. You guys got places to be, but thank you so much. The livestock are so happy and so grateful. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Oh my God. Oh my God, you just made life so much easier. You just made life so much easier.
I just have to say, when we were reading her application, we were howling. The goat names are just outrageously amazing. Last, but certainly not least, we want to recognize Terry Williams, one of the founders of Radically Rural and currently in leadership at the Keene Sentinel and our community journalism track leader, along with Jack Rooney this year. He is retiring at the end of this year, and wow, is it well deserved. His part-time hours right now are even probably more like full-time, but I didn't write specific comments for him because I wanted to speak from the heart momentarily, don't worry. And also because I sent all my comments ahead of time to both of them to review, and I didn't want him to know what they were. But what I love about Terry is that he is a leader and he's a doer. He does the hard work. He stays up half the night every year at Radically Rural helping the students put this paper together for us. He doesn't ask of anyone what he won't do himself. He picks up the snacks. He puts out a paper. He does everything on every scale and is a wonderful example to everyone that works with him. And thanks to him, I'm better at writing press releases now and use fewer exclamation points. I use lots of exclamation points. So Terry, I'd love to invite you to come speak a few words for us. And since this is your last year, welcome. I'll wait till he's up here. This Terry, Jack put together, and so lots of folks have signed it for you. We broke the glass today, so we will get you some more. So be careful, it's going to fall out. But thank you so much for everything. I've loved working with you.
Well, those are very nice words, but she had me with this cool hat that they gave me. I can honestly say that Radically Rural has given me more than I've given it. The connections I've made, the ideas that have been shared with me, the inspiration and innovation that each year springs from this event are simply motivating and impossible to ignore. More than 6 years ago, Mary Ann and I retreated to the W.S. Badger Company, which is a highly innovative institution in its own right, to brainstorm about what we could do to expand the Connect event, which many of you attended last night. We tossed around the idea of a rural version of South by Southwest, albeit a humble version. We had no grand illusions of hordes of people flocking to Keene, but we did have this question. Could Keene become known as an incubator and a collector and a distributor of great rural ideas? If so, then perhaps that would be enough. But Mary Ann and now Juliana have taken this far further than I could have expected. They have challenged me as a track leader to think about big ideas, things that move needles, things that beckon folks to come to Keene, to network, to share, and to breathe a bit, and to leave uplifted and encouraged. In many places, the community landscape these days is fraught. It's easy to dwell on that which seems overwhelming or impossible. As a society, we seem particularly adept at citing problems and often rather poor at solving them. Nowhere is this more evident than the space that I occupy, and that's local news. With communities losing newspapers at an alarming rate, particularly in rural America, we've spent an inordinate amount of time diagramming the problem as if a schematic of that problem will simply make it go away. Radically Rural asks us to find solutions instead. Who's making something work? Who has the next idea? What can we celebrate? And where does this lead us next? I am proud to having played a role in Radically Rural, and I thank publisher Tom Ewing and my colleagues at the Keene Sentinel for giving me the space to do so. I also thank Mary Ann, Juliana, Lillian, my track leader cohorts, and all the volunteers, staff, and community members who have contributed to this summit. You're all firmly part of my heart, and not the bypass part. You have my best wishes for continued success. Find solutions, fix things, move needles, move mountains. Thank you. Thank you very much.
If he were Roger, he'd come out again, right? No. Wonderful. So a few very small logistics. As you leave here, if you could turn in your lanyards, that would be great. We try to reduce waste and reuse them every year. And we are able to mingle and enjoy time together in the lobby, but if we could be out by 6, that would be great so the colonial staff can go home. And don't forget to register for the 2024 summit before the close of the year if you'd like to be entered to win 2 nights of hotel stay for your trip. And I hope to see many of you at the after party at Nova Arts. So we can go at 7, it starts closer to 8. But I always hate ending on logistics, so I just will reiterate that each of you are a piece of the puzzle that comes together so that we can all best work together, serve our communities, and ultimately just keep shaping and sharing amazing ideas together. So everyone, have a wonderful evening, and I will see you throughout the year and hopefully in person again next year.